Every sacred ritual in our lives deserves a proper benediction, an act of culmination that ushers us to the end of one important event and sends us out into the world. As someone who is often called upon to give and offer benedictions, I now see them in the most unusual places. Sometimes I find them on street signs that say, "Exit here," "Turn this way," "Slow down," "Yield," "Caution," "Danger," "Narrow road ahead." Or in music lyrics like Bob Dylan's "Forever Young." In the late 90s, a relatively unknown band had a one-hit wonder when they wrote a benediction for the sacred ritual of leaving the bar at the end of the night, entitled "Closing Time." For those of you who know it, I apologize for getting it now stuck in your head for the rest of the day. Some of the lyrics are, "Closing time, open all the doors and let you out into the world. Closing time, turn all the lights on over every boy and every girl. Closing time, one last call for alcohol, so finish your whiskey or beer. Closing time, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here." The story of Jesus' transfiguration is basically God telling Peter and the disciples, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. If you've ever been to the mountains, you can understand why Peter and his companions wanted to set up camp there. Mountains are beautiful, holy, sacred places. And in the Bible, they are the location of the most important moments in the history where people encounter God. After 40 days and nights, Noah's ark settled on a mountain. Abram took Isaac up on a mountain. Moses received the 10 Commandments on a mountain. Elijah heard God in the sound of sheer silence on a mountain. Jesus preached his most famous sermon on a mountain. And then Jesus took his inner circle up to pray on a mountain. You know, people pay thousands of dollars to go on retreats with Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra, and Richard Rohr, and Marianne Williamson. Can you imagine what it was like to go on a retreat with Jesus on the top of a mountain? It's no wonder Peter wanted to stay there. And yet we know that Peter was confused about what was really happening that day. Confusion is a common experience for the followers of Jesus. We think we should stay when we are supposed to go, and we go when we are supposed to stay. It might not be all our fault, since we follow a teacher who taught in riddles and parables. It's easy to be confused by Jesus, by who he is, by what he's called us to be and to do. I expect our confusion would increase dramatically if we were up on a mountain with Jesus praying, when his face suddenly changed and his clothes started dazzling and a couple of ghosts came out of nowhere and started to talk to him. Can you imagine how terrifying that would be? How confusing. Peter's not the only one who's confused by this theophany. Scholars today still struggle to explain why this event even occurred or what it means. Some think the appearance of Moses and Elijah confirm that Jesus stands squarely in Israel's tradition as the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Others imagine that this moment is the definitive statement of Jesus' divinity. Still others see it as a foreshadowing of resurrection and ascension. Moses' body was buried in a place that no one knows. Elijah, of course, was taken up in a chariot of fire. One of the reasons I think we're confused about this story is that as Christians in the West, we have no conception of the significance of ancestors in religious tradition. The Oscar-winning movie Black Panther offers us a picture of the way first century readers may have understood this moment, this transfiguration. Those of you who watched it will remember the film begins with the death of King T'Chaka. His son, T'Challa, returns home to take up his father's mantle and serve as the king of Wakanda. And what follows is not simply a political process or transition of power, passing authority from one monarch down to the next, but instead a richly textured series of spiritual ceremonies. T'Challa must undergo a rite of passage to assume the throne. He must face physical challenges and take part in religious rituals where he encounters his ancestors and calls on their wisdom. Then he's buried and resurrected from the sand in a ritual overseen by the elders. In African spirituality, ancestors function as advisors who should be honored and venerated and consulted long after their deaths. King T'Chaka remains active throughout T'Challa's life as a guide and a touchstone for him. Jesus, had a lot of ancestors. The whole Old Testament is filled with them. And though Christians have long considered Jesus to be prophet, priest, and king, notice who appeared at this pivotal moment in Jesus' life. He was not surrounded by the patriarchs like Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Jacob, or priests like Abimelech, Ahijah, or Abiathar. Unlike King T'Challa in Black Panther, Jesus was not surrounded by kings, King David, King Solomon, King Hezekiah, King Josiah. He was surrounded by prophets. They are the ancestors who come to his aid at this critical point in Jesus' ministry to offer him wisdom and guidance. No, Jesus had never met Elijah and Moses. He'd only heard about them in stories, but he knew that they both had been rejected and exhausted and threatened by death. And so, in order to discern the way forward, Jesus stopped to listen to these two prophets who had walked a similar path. When Jesus prayed, he not only listened for the voice of God, he also listened for the wisdom of his ancestors. Who are your ancestors? Better yet, who are the ancestors you need at this critical point in your life? Are they family and friends who have gone? Or others you need to hear from? Wise guides who died long before you were born? Can you seek them out for wisdom? Can you listen for their voice? Or does it make you feel uncomfortable to even think about it? Most Christians only think about their ancestors on All Saints Sunday, when we imagine ourselves surrounded by that great cloud of witnesses. But doesn't that cloud surround us all the time? Lately, I've been trying to listen for the voice of my grandfather, as well as other mentors and teachers I've had over the years who've died. I also try to listen for the voice of Heaton, and Marnie, and Owens, and all the leaders who've come before me. In these confusing and unsettling times, I don't know about you, but I need to hear the voice of prophets and poets. Frederick Douglass, James Baldwin, Fannie Lou Hamer, Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, Henry Nouwen, Howard Thurman, Mary Oliver. Who are your ancestors? What are they saying to you? Luke tells us Moses and Elijah came to have a specific conversation with Jesus. We're told they appeared in glory and they were speaking about his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. At first, it sounds like they came to talk about his death on the cross. It would make sense for these two giant prophets to come at this crucial turning point in Jesus' ministry, to help him to prepare for the death that he would soon undergo. But there's a word here that orients the story in a different direction. The word departure. It seems like a word that Luke used to avoid saying death. But in Greek, the word departure doesn't mean death. It means exodus. In fact, it's the same word, exodus, that is used to describe the liberation of the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt when they wandered 40 years in the desert with Moses as their leader, a journey that ended up, on a mountain. Elijah, too, remember, had a personal exodus, fleeing the wrath of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. He wandered through the desert for 40 days and ended his journey in a cave, on the top of a mountain. The great prophets, Moses and Elijah, had not come to talk to Jesus about his death, but about his exodus from Galilee to Jerusalem. They weren't there to talk to Jesus about how to die, but to talk to him about how to walk that journey toward the cross. They'd come to talk about the beginning and not the end. They were there to talk about the path of liberation, the journey to find his own liberation, and his journey for the liberation of the world. And I can hear Moses and Elijah saying to Jesus, listen, when you walk the path of liberation and work for the freedom and deliverance of others, you will face contention and opposition and rejection. You will encounter challenges and conflict and pain and suffering. People will try to hunt you down and kill you. These are the unavoidable aspects of an Exodus journey. But remember our stories and know that God will be with you and that God will provide for you on your journey through the wilderness. We are less than 3 days from the beginning of the season of Lent, which starts on Ash Wednesday, and Lent is a 40-day spiritual journey, an exodus through the wilderness toward the cross. Lent is coming whether we want to participate in it or not. The question is not if we will take the journey, but how we will walk. Who are the ancestors you need to listen to as you begin the journey of Lent? As you embark on a quest for your own liberation, as you take your exodus? Who has the wisdom that you need to help you walk that journey well? Poor Peter thought that he could avoid the journey. Even more tragic and misguided, Peter seems to imagine that his journey was over, that this was the end of his journey. He tried to plant a flag and set up camp, build some tents, enshrine the moment, stay for a while. He thought this was the end of the road, the finish line. But in reality, Peter's journey was only just beginning. Mountains are usually the place where the journey of a prophet ends, but that is where Jesus' journey begins, and it is where the journey begins for all of us who wish to follow him. Maybe that's why Peter was so confused, or why a cloud overshadowed them and a voice said, "This is my son, my chosen, listen to him." The disciples had such great difficulty listening. They not only fell asleep on the mountain, but they struggled to hear Jesus' most important words. Right before they went up on the mountain, Jesus said, "I must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and killed. If you want to be my followers, you must deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me." But it did not register in the ears of the disciples. Every time Jesus said the word cross, he meant that a confrontation with Roman imperial power was an unavoidable part of his journey. The cross was not an easy word for the disciples to hear, and even if they could hear it, they did not want to listen. But listening is the central quality needed for a follower of Jesus. It involves hearing and then acting, on what you hear. However, hearing and acting are not automatic. They can be disrupted by the daily concerns of life: wealth, temptation, persecution. And hearing that does not lead to action is not listening. To listen is to hear the teachings of Jesus and live by them. We listen actually not with our ears, but with our feet, by walking the Exodus journey of liberation. When Jesus spoke about the journey that he and his followers would have to make, Peter would not listen. He told Jesus they should not go to Jerusalem for any reason whatsoever, but Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." And Peter was quite pleased to see the glory without the struggle on the mountain, the joy without the need for the journey. "It is good for us to be here, Jesus," he said. "Let us make 3 dwellings." But a voice from the cloud said, "Peter, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here." Scottish theologian Henry Drummond once wrote, "God does not make mountains to be inhabited. It is not God's desire that we live on the mountaintops. We only ascend the heights to catch a broader vision of the earthly surroundings below. We don't tarry there. The mountain is of use to send streams into the valley of our ordinary life, to fertilize and to nourish what is already there. The streams begin in the uplands, but then they descend quickly to gladden the valley below." Transfiguration was and is the last call for the disciples, the last moment to turn around before the journey. With the words, "Listen to him," God was saying, this is the last call for the mountaintops and for building tents, for watching the show and soaking up the glory. This is the last call for those who want the highs without the lows, who want the ups without the downs, the mountains without the valleys. This is the last call for those who want praise without lament, light without darkness, consolation without desolation, grace without truth, gain without pain, growth without struggle, resolution without conflict, joy without difficulty, the reward without the hard work. This is the last call for those who want to skip to the end quickly, jump over all the sadness and pain, fast forward through all the hard parts. This is the last call for those who want divinity without humanity, salvation without repentance, resurrection without sacrifice, Easter without Lent, life without death, an empty tomb without the cross. This is the last call for those who want to admire Jesus in all his glory, but do not want to follow him with their feet. This is the last call for those who will not take the journey. Dan Wilson wrote the song "Closing Time" when his wife was pregnant with a child. And the song was not originally written about leaving a bar, but about the experience of being born. Closing time. Time for you to go out to the places that you will be from. Closing time. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Closing time. Open all the doors and let you out into the world. It's closing time. It's time to be reborn. It's time to call upon our ancestors for wisdom and listen to Jesus, so that we can see the way forward and have the courage to journey in that direction. It's time to come down off the mountain and go into the valley with nourishment and joy for the world below. It's time to make our exodus toward Jerusalem, to follow the way of the cross, to face the force of imperial power, to listen with our feet, and to walk the road of the season of Lent. It's time to seek our own liberation and discover what it means to work for the liberation of the world. The journey that we must take into our hearts and into the world will be treacherous and glorious. Yet we make the journey together as people on a journey of faith, trusting that God will be with us, but knowing we don't have to go home, but we can't stay here. Amen.